I know the money don't really make me whole. The magazine covers drenched in gold. The dreams of Greenie and Mansion and Happy. The little things I need to save my soul. And I know the money don't really make me whole.
Why, hello. If you're watching this, you're probably an aspiring poet. And I, with my cup of coffee, am here to not so much teach you how to be a poet, because you already are a poet, but I've got some things that could probably help you out a little bit. So that's why we're doing this whole video series about how to be a poet. And this is called How to Poet. You see, poeting, and yes, poeting is a word because I say it's a word, and that is the beauty of language. It is descriptive by you, not prescripted by someone else. Poeting is a very open thing. Yes, there are haiku and sonnets and epics and elegies and limericks and free verse, and the list goes on and on. A lot of spoken word poetry you hear these days is a bit more on the free verse side, where there are no direct rules or style to follow, and the goal is for the writer merely to flow with their own internal logic. And even in this, though, I would argue, there are rules that we naturally follow. For instance, my poems, I tend to follow a natural cadence of my voice, which may not be as rigid as the 15 lines of Shakespearean sonnet, but certainly is a boundary that, if my word choice isn't fitting to the natural way I speak, I have to work within. See, haiku in English is 17 syllables. Most people split it into 3 lines where it's like 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables, but the only thing you really strictly need is the existence of 17 and only 17 syllables. Let's back things up a little bit, because some of you may be wondering, what is a syllable? And just to fill you in really quick, it is the certain number of vowel sounds within a word, like those A, E, I, O, U. You take those and you count them out. So, for instance, I'll give you an example. The word syllable has 3 vowel sounds, syllable. And basically, that's a very shorthanded way of finding out what syllables are. So, another example is the word team. The word team has 1 syllable despite it has 2 vowels in it, because it only makes 1 vowel sound. Get it? Got it? Good. We'll need it for our first lesson on haiku. Now, haiku are only 17 syllables. That doesn't leave you a whole lot of space to work with for a full thought. Here's a sample of a haiku I wrote at the end of a depressive cycle, just as I started to feel better. It goes like this. As this winter ends, I wake from cold dreams to find I was where I am. Little finger's tricky. As this winter ends, I wake from cold dreams to find I was where I am. In Japan, where their writing system is different than English, traditionally, haiku is made with 1 line that goes downward in kanji rather than left to right like our language, but typically, some aspect of nature is involved in the poem. For instance, in mine, I took winter and used it to show my depression as an example. Why don't you try your own here? 17 syllables, 1 full thought, incorporate a piece of nature into the poem if you can. If you need a writing prompt, I got one for you right here. Describe the life of a bug living inside a house. Like, compare yourself to the bug. And go ahead, just pause the video here. We'll be back, and we'll be back for the next lesson on how to symbolize. But go ahead and pause it right now. All right, we're moving on to how to symbolize. Good work on the haiku, though. You've done a poetry. You've done a single poetry in the span of this video. Congratulations. But you might be sitting there wondering to yourself, and yes, I really like the idea of being creative, but I don't know how language works to help me be creative. And how do you actually use words and language to convey a thought without directly saying it? Well, you're in luck, as today I'll give you a brief overview of different techniques to use while writing a poem. There's a few techniques we'll be using for this. Symbolism is a wide open subject and very open to your own interpretation and imagination, but even then, there are parts that we can refine down and bring up. Today, we'll be discussing personification, metaphor, simile, allegory, and then we'll move into different ways of using these symbolic terms with writing techniques like rhyming, alliteration, consonance, and assonance. And don't worry, I know I just threw a lot of big words at you. It's easier than it sounds, I promise. Don't build it up in your head too much. 90% of these things you do on a daily basis without even realizing it. All we're doing is focusing on what you already instinctively do. We're just putting names behind it and focusing on them specifically. So let's start with personification. Giving inanimate objects and things and animals and anything that isn't a person people-like traits to help set a scene or show a point. For instance, I could say, the dusty chair was in the corner where it had been placed. But that doesn't tell you anything about why the chair is there or what the setting is for the chair. There's no real hint to the scene as to like why it's significant. There's no description for people to latch onto. So let's change it up. The chair sat, sad and dusty, in the corner. Ooh, that gives you a little something to chew on there. It's like, oh, okay, so the room, the tone of the room is sad. So if I give these personification aspects to inanimate objects like the chair and the corner itself, suddenly I have a whole scene in my mind instead of just an image. So, you know what? Let's try one yourself. Go ahead and just pick up a pencil or tap on your keyboard, something close by, and write me a happy line about something that's nearby you. It could be the pencil itself if you want. Just something joyful about it. Give the pencil a joyful emotion or whatever object you pick. And go ahead and pause this because we'll be moving on to metaphor and simile next. Metaphor and simile. These are two sides of the same coin, just about. See, both are using one thing to describe another. For instance, her smile was like a fading sunset. I'm using the sunset to describe her smile. And that was a simile. What is a simile? Let's break it down a little more. A simile is an indirect comparison, one that uses like or as or a similar word to make it clear that in this case, her smile is not literally a hot burning ball of plasma, the sun, that's burning everything around it. A metaphor, on the other hand, is a direct comparison, one that uses words like is to set the scene. In example, using similar wording, her smile is a fading sunset, turning darker by the moment. Do you see how this description is completely different to the simile from before? In the simile, her smile was placid and beautiful, similar to that of a fading sunset. In the metaphor, her smile is fading from her face, much like the sun setting. So it's similar to personification if you really break it down. So let's go ahead and practice a little bit. Use those two techniques. Write down your best simile and your best metaphor that you can. Simile, remember, uses like or as. So like, her smile is like a setting sun versus metaphor, which her smile is a setting sun. Yeah. And go ahead and pause this and we'll be back with allegory. Ooh. All right, we're back with allegory. And here we take what we learned with personification and simile and metaphor and we heighten it up. Rather than personifying a single object or a single thing being compared to another to make an image or a point, this is an entire story that's built to create an image or make a point or teach a lesson. And by telling the story, it conveys a message that isn't overtly stated in the words of the story. Okay, that sounds overly complicated, but I guarantee you know more than a few examples. The tortoise and the hare is a great one. Is an allegory for how slow and steady and focus is better than running around like a cocky fool and being sloppy. A step further, the show Steven Universe is an allegory to how love and acceptance can overcome anything. You could argue that a lot of war movies are an allegory for the hardships and horrors of war. These are stories that are told to convey the message behind why you're telling the story. Here's an example I made with a spoken word piece. The intent is to convey the need to hold on to growth and courage in the face of my own mental illness. It's a wrestling match where I physically fight my depression. Tonight, in this very ring, we witness a veritable David versus Goliath, as tonight, one man wrestles his own depression to pinfall or submission. Listen as the crowd noise simmers just above silence and anticipation. Man waits already in the ring as depression comes out to full fanfare, a gold belt, and an entourage of anxiety. He slides in the ring so smooth his chest barely grazes the canvas. The crowd roars its hate as the bell rings, as depression pulls brass knuckles out of its tights and onto its fist, as anxiety climbs in the ring to distract the ref as punches thrown. It plants across man's chin. Man falls unconscious. Depression puts one boot on his chest as the ref counts in what feels like slow motion. 1. Man is broken. Tired of all these late night phone calls to friends who were never there when he needs them. 2. And lying in that ring, blood pouring from the open wound in his head, he realizes no one can save him from this. Except himself. Shocked screams ring out from the crowd as man's shoulder slips up from the canvas they both stand. Man backs his opponent into the corner, throwing his fist at depression again and again and again. For the first time in his entire life, it feels like he just might win. The arena shakes from the sound of it all as man covers for the pin and the ref counts 1, 2. Depression shoves man off. Says, what'd you think this was? A Hallmark moment? Clinical depression is a lifelong condition. You cannot fight it with cute memes and wishful thinking. Pulling yourself up by your bootstraps does not make you fly. Physics doesn't work like that. Depression doesn't work like that. Man stumbles to his feet, still dazed from the brass knuckle punch of his condition as depression springs off the ropes, bores itself through man's chest. Man falls unconscious once again. As depression covers for the pin, the ref counts 1, 2, 3. Shocked silence as the audience leaves. Man lays in the ring, broken, beaten, but still breathing. And in the morning, he laces his boots for the day's fight to come, and he knows he won't win yet. And that's not the point. The point is someday he's going to learn how to fight. So that's a sample of what I do. Basically what I've done there is it is the allegory of the struggle of trying to deal with living with depression. Also, I personify depression, literally, as like I make it a person that I'm fighting. What other things do I do in there? If you want, go back through the poem and just pick out like where I use simile, if I use simile, where I use metaphor, if I use metaphor, where I use personification, if I use personification. Yeah, go ahead and pick those out if you so desire and want a little extra practice. So, anyway. We're going to do a little bit of a writing exercise here. We're going to do what's called a narrative poem or a prose poem where you're really writing a story. And here's your writing prompt if you need one. I want you to make an allegory. It could be about anything that you want, any statement that you're trying to make. But here's an idea. Here's your writing prompt. You are a soldier on a battlefield. Are you a medic? Are you a lieutenant, a captain, a grunt? Whatever you choose to be. The enemy is coming. Is it better to run or stay and fight? Don't answer those questions directly. Just tell me a story where these moments happen and use the characters, how they react to the situation, as showing what you value and what your choice would be. So go ahead, pause me again, and we'll be moving to the last part of the video. So, simply saying sentences sounds sweet, but what if our words worked with what we were writing? See what I did there? What I did there is called alliteration, where each or most of the words in a sentence repeat the opening letter. So, simply saying sentences sounds sweet. These techniques are things that have been found over centuries of use to be pleasing to the human ear. Poetry, in that aspect, is really like a soft science, like psychology. The ability to tap into human emotion is multidimensional and requires a lot of different approaches. Just like being emotional in your writing is a very good start, but to bump it up even higher, to hit even harder, here's some techniques that have been found to work well. Alliteration. What I just did, the sentence where every opening letter to each word is the same. Sally sells seashells by the seashore. That is alliteration. Great example, a perfect example of alliteration. If you look up the rapper Blackalicious, he made the rap alphabet. Alliteration. Amazing alliteration. That's the first one. 2, rhyming. We know this one. We typically, though, we know the version where the ending word of a sentence or line sounds the same as another. But did you know there's multiple forms of rhyme? End rhymes are the traditional ones. And even with your end rhymes, there's all sorts of different ways of breaking up that structure. Like, check this out. You can hit a rhyme, the same rhyme, for 4 lines. You can hit the same rhyme on alternating lines. So like one line, skip, rhymes with the first. You can alternate between lines that do rhyme and ones that don't. You can hit 2 lines that rhyme, then 2 lines that rhyme differently, and there's even more forms, just about any combination your brain can think of, but let's focus on these 4. The same rhyme for 4 lines, like, I went to the bay, it was a lovely day, I went to see what I say to this girl when I said, hey. Boom. That's 4 lines that each end with a rhyming word. Now, same rhyme on alternating lines. Here's an example. I was born to be me. No one get in my way. Of being all I can be, I don't care what you say. See, so you had like the A rhyme, the first rhyme, which was I was born to be me. And then that rhymes with of being all I can be. So it's, you see what I'm saying here? Alternating lines rhyme. There's alternating between lines that don't rhyme and lines that do. For instance, I love the smell of rainfall. Its sweet scent reminds me to stop and enjoy life as it comes, rather than push through days till I drop. These each give their own kind of feel and vibe to the poem as you're putting them together. And you don't have to use any of these. You don't even have to rhyme with poetry. These are just, again, tools that have been found to be successful at capturing someone's ear. And finally, 2 lines that rhyme, then 2 lines that rhyme differently. I'm going to borrow some verse from Slick Rick's children's story. If you don't know Slick Rick and you don't mind some hip-hop, get that in your life. It's the very start of it. Once upon a time not long ago, when people wore pajamas and lived life slow, when laws were stern and justice stood, and people were behaving like they ought to good. Yeah. 2 lines rhymed, and then the next 2 lines rhymed with each other, but not the first 2. Bada bing. But this isn't all the rhyme that exists. There are even more rhymes. Internal rhymes are where your words tear up the rhyme inside of your lines. See what I did there? Tear up the rhyme inside of your lines. Kind of forces a machine gunning of words like, you heard when I murdered that example with a sample of ample importance and worth. Internal rhyme. There's near rhyme, which a word sounds almost like it rhymes, like rhymes inside of your lines. Rhyme and line sound almost the same, but aren't quite, but they still sound nice. So go ahead, write some lines that rhyme and use different rhyme schemes that we've outlined here. If you need a reminder, feel free to rewind and pause before we get into our last part of the section and the end of the video. Consonants and assonants. These are pretty straightforward. So remember alliteration, how it's consecutive words that start with the same letter sound, like Sally sells seashells at the seashore. This is even more open than alliteration. Consonants is any repeating consonant sounds, and assonance is any repeating vowel sounds, no matter where they fall in the words themselves. Just any of those repeating sounds that stand out and you intentionally speak to make them stand out more. For instance, check this out. Great example. Consonants. A single consonant sound repeating. Quickly I keep my comfort close because it continues to collapse if I let it crumble. Consonants. Repeating the word, the C sound within it, within the words. It doesn't matter where it falls. If you notice, because had the C in the middle. Could have been at the end, could have been at the start, didn't matter. As long as you're repeating that sound throughout the sentence. Then you have assonance, which is a single vowel sound repeating. For instance, Amy was able to brave the weather and drape a blanket over her cat. The A sound is what repeats there. And even though it's in the middle of words like blanket, drape, brave, it still works. It's still assonance. So try a couple of your own. Write some consonants, write some assonants. Go ahead and pause, and we'll be right back with the end. So here we are at the end. You might be wondering to yourself, well, this is all good and well, but I want to write my own stuff now. Thanks for all the information, but like, a little prompt for my own writing instead of having you tell me to write down consonants and assonants and rhyme schemes, all of that jazz. So here's my idea. I want you to do some free verse. I want you to write whatever's in your heart. And if you need a little help, I'll have a prompt at the end of this. But go ahead and write it down. You can throw it to Grace, you can throw it to me, whoever. Write it in the comments even, if you want to write it in the comments. Write down your own poem. Try to use some of the skills you've learned in this video, and if you liked it, make sure you keep up with the Creation District. Trying to do some cool stuff. Oh, and if you're wondering what this shirt is, this is the Individual World Poetry Slam. My name is And yes, I am ranked top 50 in the world for spoken word, and it's been a delight teaching this class today. So I hope that you have a good day, and here's that little prompt right here.